What exactly is a draft grade? Welcome to the show. This is the Niner Narrative, and I am Chunder Boy. I'll be your host this evening. Now, what we're talking about tonight is drafts. Draft grades, what do they mean? This space, especially this time of year, when I say this space, I mean content creation. There's a lot of talk about draft grades and building through the draft. And to build a Super Bowl roster, you have to draft well and yada, yada, yada. I don't think there's that many people that actually go into too much depth. It's just kind of like agreed upon by everybody that that's the case. And for the record, I agree. Championship teams are built through the draft. However, I think there's a bit of a common misconception on what a good draft looks like. I think that there's a bit of a common misconception on what a bad draft looks like. And this is probably the most important part, what should we expect out of any given draft class? So the reason I'm going about this the way I'm going about it is because I feel like the draft grades of A, B, C, I just feel like it's insufficient. And so I set out to create my own algorithm where I take sort of all of the factors that you would include in your analysis of a draft pick, and I assign values. I then put all that through a compilation, and you get a number at the end. And it kind of gives you a general idea of how good or bad an overall draft was. So how did I go about this? So for starters, you have to understand what a draft grade is. Draft grades are basically taking, okay, if you have one good player, one medium player, and a bunch of nobodies, that's kind of seen as like you did fine. You didn't hit a home run, but you had a good draft. That's a solid draft. If you hit like one really good player with 3 or 4 high level like contributor / starters, and most of your draft actually plays in your team for a long period of time, like that's your home run draft. And then of course everybody knows what a bad draft looks like. All the guys you draft never really play for you, and it's kind of a wasted year for the draft. So that's all draft grades are really saying. It's like A, B, C, D, E. The problem is nobody ever actually explains what an A is. What does an A draft look like? How many players from a 7-player draft have to hit for it to be an A? One Hall of Fame caliber player or 3 quality starters? Is that a B instead of an A? Nobody actually freaking knows. So what I tried to do is create something that's a little bit more in-depth, insightful, and gives you a little bit clearer understanding of what exactly a draft grade is representing. So what determines a good draft pick? For me, the way I built this was essentially 2 pillars with multipliers. So pillar number 1 is contribution, because essentially that's what you're asking with a draft grade. You're saying, what does this player contribute to the team that drafted them? Do they start any games? Are they a role player? Are they a perennial all-pro? Is this the guy you pay the bag to? All of those questions, right? So that's what you're like, what actually constitutes a good draft pick? Then you have to kind of cross-reference that to how long did this player contribute to your team? So you could have a player like a Talanoa Hufanga who wins an all-pro in his rookie season, but doesn't make it to the end, like doesn't get re-signed with the team that drafted him. So is that a good draft pick? I mean, of course it is. You drafted a guy in the 5th round who made an all-pro in his rookie season, contributed really well, then got injured. You decided you didn't want to make the pay, didn't want to pay him. He moves on to another team. It's not a bad draft pick, but it's not an A+ either, even though he made an all-pro in his first year. You have unfortunately, one of the biggest busts in the history of the NFL in Trey Lance. Trade 3 first-round picks. He only plays 4 games for you. That's a bust. That's a total whiff. They missed. And, I know there's a lot of people that feel like Trey Lance wasn't treated fairly. He wasn't given an opportunity to play, to get better. For one, Kyle Shanahan has a clear track record of understanding which players are good and which ones aren't. There's a very small group of people, like maybe 3 or 4 players total in 10 years, that have been cut by the 49ers and gone on to be high-level starters for another team. Or Kyle Shanahan, he missed. He got it wrong. He cut a guy who went on to play big minutes for another team. That's only happened like a handful of times in 10 years. Meanwhile, there's a lot of players that we've gathered from other teams who have performed better with the 49ers than any other place that they've been. Right now, development, that's a separate conversation for another day. Today, we're sticking to draft grades, what makes a guy a good draft pick or a bad draft pick. So, pillar 1, what did they actually contribute to the team? What did they do while they were on your team? Pillar 2, longevity. How long did they do it for? Okay. Then you have multipliers. So you take those first numbers and you multiply them by where you were drafted, right? Because a starting caliber quarterback who has now made multiple Pro Bowls, drafted in the 7th round, is far more valuable than a wide receiver who was taken in the 1st round, even if they also got an all-pro in Brandon Aiyuk. Who's more valuable to this team, Brock Purdy or Brandon Aiyuk? I don't think it's close. So part of the reason that you are going through this process of evaluations is you're trying to not only get a guy who's going to contribute, but who's going to contribute for a long time. And you're trying to do your best to get as much value out of each pick as possible. You would love to get an all-pro caliber player in every round, but that's not likely. This is why so many teams take best player available early. Because if you try to fit to need, you end up whiffing, and now you're wasting valuable draft capital because the guy that you pick in the 1st round, you're expecting him to contribute at a high level. The guy that you pick on day 3, you're expecting him to be developmental. So you need to have a multiplier in there for that to account for it. And the other multiplier that I have is positional value. Let's be honest. Quarterbacks are kings. Okay? Tackles are more valuable than running backs. Okay? Defensive tackles, especially a high-level quality defensive tackle, is more important than a safety. Just the way it is. Okay? So what we need to do is we need to focus our attention. Gammon, I'm recording a video right now. Leave me alone. Sorry about that. So need to focus our attention on the things that are critical. So contribution, longevity, where they were drafted, and positional value. That's what I've determined with this number that I'm coming up with. So let's look at some of the things that are kind of critical to the way this works. I'm going to give you a brief rundown of kind of how I did the scoring. I'm not going to get into every bit of it, but I'm going to get into a few of the things. So the way I did this algorithm is basically, so for contributions, all I did was just apply a number to each thing that you do, right? So if you did never play a start for a team, you get a 0. You never started for the team, so it doesn't matter if you're drafted round 1 or round 7. If you get drafted by a team, they're expecting you to contribute in some way, even if you get drafted in the 7th round. They don't add players to their roster. They don't use draft picks on players they don't think will ever contribute to their team. Now, the guys that are drafted in the 6th round have far lower expectations of contributing, and their contributions are not expected to be as much or as long. However, they are still expected to contribute. So 0 plays means you get a 0. Now, if you play anytime, whether it's contributing in a role, whether it's special teams or you're just a rotational guy, Doesn't matter. Even if you never start a game, if you're on the field, suited up and contributing for your team, you get a point. If you start a game, 2 points. If you start multiple games, 3 points. If you get Pro Bowls, all pros, 6 points. Multiple all pros and Pro Bowls, 12 points. So everything escalates based on your contribution. The point system for contribution is very simple. What did you actually contribute? Points assessed. For longevity, it's very simple. Did you sign a second contract with the team that drafted you? If not, did you play all 4 years for the team that drafted you? And if you did sign a new contract, what kind of contract was it? Was it like, because Colton McKivitz is now on a second, third, or maybe even fourth contract with the 49ers, but it's like one of the best, the best quality contracts for a team in the NFL. You have a quality starting right tackle, and you're paying him like less than $10 million a year. That's a steal. Whereas you have guys like Fred Warner, George Kittle, and Brandon Aiyuk, who all signed and Nick Bosa, who all signed top tier deals. Trent Williams, Brock Purdy, so on and so forth. So obviously we didn't draft Trent though. So that's kind of how I did this. So let's get into this a little bit more. Let me show you guys what do the Niners actually do in their drafting. How good are their drafts, or how bad are their drafts? Okay, so I'm going to take everybody back. The 49ers scrapped the roster in 2017. Shanahan and Lynch came in, and they literally only kept, I think it was 13 players from the roster from the previous season in 2016. They gutted it. 3 years later, in 2019, they're in the Super Bowl. So this is a perfect picture of how in 3 years you can draft and sign free agents your way to a Super Bowl. What do those drafts actually look like? Okay, because you would expect you had to go home run after home run after home. If you built a Super Bowl roster off of 13 players in 3 seasons, and when you look at the free agents they signed, what was the center's name? Richburg? Literally got injured like, what did he play, 1 season? Signed a big money for McKinnon, who I thought was going to be dynamic in this team. Couldn't stay healthy. Didn't finish out his contract. So it's not like they loaded up on just killer free agents. They got to that 2019 Super Bowl mostly through the draft. Let's take a look at those drafts. So the very first draft, 2017, the 49ers overall score for the 2017 draft is 62.8. Sorry, 62.81. Okay. Now, is that good? Is that bad? We'll get into that in a second. I'm going to compare some of these to the Seahawks and to the Rams so you can kind of see what those drafts look like and what the 49ers drafts have looked like. So in 2017, 62.81. This draft was primarily propped up by one player. George Kittle gets a 36. Okay, so George Kittle is over half of the score for this draft. And that is what happens in real life. When you get an all-world, top of his position, Hall of Fame player in the 5th round, it almost doesn't matter what the rest of your draft is. You had a good draft. You got a Hall of Famer out of that draft. It's a good draft. Now, is that a C+ draft? Is it a B- draft? Right? If the rest of the players suck and you just got that one guy, that's passing, right? It's a good draft. C+ maybe, right? So that's why the grades are kind of weird. You don't know exactly where you fall. Now, there were a couple of other guys that in that draft that contributed for the 49ers, right? Now, there are misses like Joe Williams. We know that. But CJ Beathard, right? That's a miss. It's a 3rd round quarterback, never really panned out. But you have guys in here like George Kittle, obviously, but Trent Taylor. Trent Taylor contributed in a meaningful way for the 49ers for several years. He was our primary returner. He actually turned out to be a really good little shifty slot slot receiver. And so he actually contributed significantly for a couple of years. And played out his rookie deal. Like, you don't get a ton for that, but I think Trent Taylor's grade's at 3.37, 3.375 points. Not great, but he got you something. Then you get somebody like DJ Jones. DJ Jones has a score of 15, right? So you got George Kittle, 36, DJ Jones, 16, Trent Taylor, 3.5. Because that's what most solid drafts look like. Is this a home run draft? No. But it is a really good draft. You got a Hall of Fame player, you got a quality starter in DJ Jones, and you got a high-level contributor who was a starter for your team for a short period of time in Trent Taylor, right? Peta didn't turn out to be much. Obviously, Joe Williams was a nothing burger. CJ Beathard a nothing burger. We also got Ahkello Witherspoon in that draft. And I know a lot of people are down on Ahkello Witherspoon. If he could figure out how to turn his head around and find a ball, he probably would have been on the 49ers for a long time. He wasn't a terrible cornerback. He had a couple really bad games. He had a couple of misses in big spots. So he gets kind of maligned, but he was a kind of decent cornerback. He's a third-round guy. It didn't quite pan out, but it's not a bust, not by a long shot, right? That's actually kind of a solid draft pick. You got, in the third round, you got a corner who contributed to a Super Bowl caliber roster. Like, nobody's pretending like he's like some high-level starter, but he's been in the league, like, what's it, 8 years now, 9 years now. He's just signed another contract with a team. That's a good draft pick. In the third round? What are we talking about? Right? So this draft gets a total of, what do I have here? 62.81, right? That's a good draft. Pretty much anything over 50 is a good draft. Anything over like 65 is like a home run draft. Anything over 70, 75, I mean, you basically hit on every pick. To get 70 plus, you have to basically hit every pick. So 2018, 49ers have Mike McGlinchey, Dante Pettis, Fred Warner, who basically carries this draft. Again, they got another Hall of Famer on this time day 2 instead of day 3. But that really props up any draft. It doesn't matter what team it is. The Kansas City Chiefs get lauded for these incredible drafts. The Ravens constantly get lauded for these incredible drafts. And they got like 3 good players out of the draft and only one guy who's like a top tier guy. And people are like, oh my God, what a great draft. It's no different than this draft the 49ers had in 2018. This is an exceptional draft. So Dante Pettis didn't pan out, obviously. Okay. Mike McGlinchey was a 5-year starter. They picked up his 5th-year option. He then signed a $20 million a year deal, which was at the top of the market at the time, with another team. The 49ers just didn't want to pay him because he just had his quad get torn off the bone like not even a year earlier from when they had to sign that contract. Mike McGlinchey, he's a solid first-round pick, right? You're hoping to get more out of a first-round pick, but at least you got a quality starter for multiple years. You got 5 years of quality starts out of Mike McGlinchey. That's a fine first-round pick. It's not what you're hoping for, but that meets expectations, okay? Tarvarius Moore contributed some, especially on special teams. Now, DJ Reed was in this draft. DJ Reed's one where it's a low score for the draft because the 49ers didn't keep him. He got injured. They cut him thinking that they would be able to sneak him past waivers because he was injured. Didn't work. He got picked up. He's turned into a quality starter around I think he's on his 3rd or 4th team now. But that's one of the few times where 49ers have cut a player that has gone on to have a lot of success with other teams. However, this particular player is a little bit of a caveat because they didn't cut him because they didn't think he was good. They cut him because they thought they could sneak him through waivers because of the injury. Now, this particular draft class, much lower. So even though this draft class has Fred Warner in it, right? And so Fred Warner in this one, he gets a 28.8 score. So why is his score not as high as Kittle? One primary reason: draft slot. You get a Hall of Fame player in the 5th round. It is a more valuable draft pick. It is a better use of resources than if you get a Hall of Fame player in the 3rd round. The expectation of a player in the 3rd round is expected to be a high-level player. The guy that you took as a tight end in the 5th round, No expectations there. So you get a little bit of a bump for that as far as how good the draft was. You identified a guy late in the draft and you were able to develop him. That's good drafting. Okay. Now, Fred Warner, so he's not quite as high as Kittle. Plus, there's no DJ Jones in this one, right? Now, DJ Reed is probably close to equivalent to DJ Jones, but Reed did it for other teams, not the 49ers. So this draft actually gets a very modest score. It's kind of really outside of Fred Warner and Mike McGlinchey, 2018 draft didn't really do much. Okay. So we're now 2 drafts in. We have 2 Hall of Fame players. We have 2 or 3 contributors, 1 high-level starter, right? Couple of decent drafts, right? 2017 better than 2018, but 2018 draft is kind of saved by Fred Warner being who he is. Now, you get to 2019, probably the 49ers' best draft. There's an argument for another draft that we'll get to in a minute. 2019 is probably the 49ers' best draft. You get Nick Bosa, 2nd overall. You get Deebo Samuel in the 2nd round at pick 36. You then miss on Jalen Hurd, but let me just stop for a second. Jalen Hurd got his neck broke. When Jalen Hurd was on the field, both in training camp and in that first preseason game, everybody was talking about how this dude plays like with reckless abandon. And this dude is exactly what the 49ers want at wide receiver. He blocks his tail off. And then on top of that, he had just started playing wide receiver like 2 years before that. He was the backup running back for Alvin Kamara. Actually, I think he was the starting running back at Tennessee, and Alvin Kamara was his backup. If I may have that backwards, but that's what he was 2 years before the 49ers drafted him at wide receiver. I really wish we could have seen what Jalen Hurd became and he hadn't broke his neck, but he did. It is what it is. The algorithm doesn't care why. The algorithm just says, you didn't finish your rookie contract. You never played a single game for him. You're a 0. It's that simple. So we move on. We get Mitch Wisnowski in 2019. We get Dre Greenlaw. Caden Smith, who went on to actually start for the Giants after the 49ers cut him. So he's one of those few players as well who actually went on to have some success after the 49ers. Yeah, so this is your quintessential. This is a home run draft. You get an all-world defensive player of the year in Nick Bosa. And for all those people out there that think Nick Bosa is going to get traded, for all those people out there that think that Nick Bosa is not an elite edge player, go look at the numbers of what the 49ers defense is with and without him. And there's a lot of games that you can look at where he's the only player missing. We're not talking about this last year where he's out and Warner's out and 3 other defensive linemen are out. That's not what I'm talking about. There's several games of data, like a half a season worth of data with just Nick Bosa missing, and it's a different defense. Nick Bosa is the most important player on the 49ers defense, not named Fred Warner. And the only reason that Fred Warner is a more important player is because he's the one that calls the defense. He is the quarterback of the defense. He gets everybody lined up. He does all the communication. He is the heart and soul of the defense. But Nick Bosa actually has a bigger impact on the defense than Fred Warner does. There's nowhere near as much of a drop-off to the defense when Fred Warner goes out than there is when Nick Bosa goes out. This year, that defense didn't fall apart when Fred Warner went out. It fell apart after Nick Bosa went out. It didn't get any better once Michael Williams went out as well. I can't wait till those 2 are back on the field this year. So, sorry, I digress. Didn't mean to rabbit hole that there. But trying to bring context to some of this, context to some of these drafts. Okay, so now we move on to the next draft pick. So real quick before we do, that was a 76.45. That is the best draft we've had so far, right? 62 for the Kittle draft, 36 for the Fred Warner draft, and a 76.45. That is an elite draft by the 49ers in 2019. Go to the Super Bowl. 2020, we trade away DeForest Buckner. We get an extra first-round pick. We take Javon Kinlaw first, then Brandon Aiyuk. In the 5th round, we get McKivitz, 6th round Charlie Warner, 7th round Juwan Jennings. Every single person we took in this draft in 2020 played meaningful snaps. You have a wide receiver who was borderline top 10 in the NFL by the time he signed his deal. We all know that went off the railroad. That went off the tracks. That didn't even like it. That we all know what happened with BA, but it was a tremendous draft pick, and it was just better and better and better year after year. And then it just went sideways for whatever reason after he got that contract. But the algorithm doesn't factor in the fact that somebody probably got CTE from a crazy hit. I shouldn't say that. I'm making a joke, but I shouldn't say that. We don't know why the BA thing went off the track, but for the purposes of how good was the draft, nobody cares what happened with the BA thing. It was a good draft pick. We got 5 years, 3 years of excellent play out of Brandon Aiyuk, 2,000-yard seasons, and a second-team All-Pro. Like, that was a tremendous draft pick. Didn't work out in the end, but it was a good draft pick. So Brandon Aiyuk's number, 24.3. So it's not as high as a Fred Warner, not as high as a George Kittle, but it shouldn't be, discounted as if, he just didn't do anything, right? To compare and contrast this with this algorithm, Deebo Samuel is a 27, right? Now, Deebo 7 is a little bit more valuable and a little bit better draft pick for 2 reasons. One, Deebo was the heart and soul of the offense. Also made an All-Pro. Okay, he was more vital to the 49ers' success than Brandon Aiyuk was. However, he was also drafted in the second round, not the first. That matters. When you're talking about grading a draft, expectations are part of the equation. Okay, Brandon Aiyuk was expected to be better than Deebo, and he never was. Now, was he a better pure route runner and pure wide receiver? Of course, yes, you can make that argument. A lot of people seem to forget that before Deebo Samuel was converted to a wide back, he had 1,000 yards at the halfway point of the season and was progressing very well as a legitimate wide receiver. Then they said, no, we're going to make you a running back instead. And his wide receiver play just immediately started to decline and eventually fell off a cliff. That's just what happened. So in this draft, you've got Javon Kinlaw. Didn't pan out what we were hoping, especially considering he's replacing DeForest Buckner. I think that's why he gets looked down upon so much, is he replaced DeForest Buckner. And so it would have been almost impossible for him to live up to the billing. And he had injuries. His knee never got right. When he finally did get healthy in that last season, with the exception of him getting thrown out of the club against the Eagles, he actually played really well that season once he got healthy. So, that's not a bust pick, but it's not a great pick either. He gets a 6.75. Algorithm doesn't care about all the ifs, whats, and where. It just talks, what did you actually do? Okay. So BA 24.3. Colt McKivitz is a 15, right? Colt McKivitz actually got cut his first year, but since then has turned out to be a high-level contributor for the team. And you get a premium position offensive tackle in the 5th round who turns into a quality starter. There you go. Now, is that as valuable as a Deebo Samuel? No, probably not. So it doesn't have the same number. That's what this algorithm is trying to figure out for us. It's giving us one number to tell us exactly what this draft actually gave us on the football field. Okay, now, Charlie Warner in the 6th round, Juwan Jennings. Okay, Juwan Jennings is a 13.5. He's a 7th round wide receiver who has contributed as he's kind of the Colton McKivitz of the wide receiver group. Now, why is it 13.5 instead of 15? Because he's not a tackle. If he was a tackle, which is a slightly more valuable position, they'd have exactly the same score. Almost exactly. Both drafted on day 3, both contributed. Neither one of them has made a Pro Bowl, so on and so forth, right? So that's the whole point of all this. So 2020, you got Aiyuk, McKivitz, Juwan Jennings. Those are your studs that those are your hits in that one. And then, Javon Kinlaw's a miss. He gave you something, but not much. 2021. This draft class gets absolutely maligned as if it's like the worst draft class ever. It's actually not. But part of the reason is because the very first draft pick ate up not just our first round of this year, but it ate up the next 2 as well. And that was Trey Lance. And that did not work at all. We all know what happened there. There's no reason to beat a dead horse. Aaron Banks, round 2. Redshirted 1 year, played 3 years, got a $20 million a year deal with Green Bay. So is that a home run pick? I mean, that's a really solid second round pick. Now, Would you hope that he was a little bit more consistent? Would you hope that you were able to keep him, retain him, and pay him, and he continued to get better for you, maybe even becomes an all-pro at some point? Of course you do. You'd love for it to get to that. But what are the expectations on day 2? A quality starter, and that's what you got out of Aaron Banks for a couple of seasons. His grade's a 10.8, right? Not at the same level of McKivitz, not at the same level of it's a Deebo, but you got something out of him, so he's not a Javon Kinlaw either. Trey Sermon, that's literally a negative. Another guy who actually gave us this is another guy who is looked down upon in hindsight, but gave us quality minutes for several years, and that's Ambry Thomas. It didn't pan out, but it's not like he's just a total bust. The dude had interceptions. How many interceptions did our secondary have last year? It wasn't very many. Ambry Thomas might have been an upgrade in this secondary that we had last year. That's how bad it was. Ambry Thomas was not a bust. He's, again, another third-round cornerback who made an impact, contributed to the team, made an impact is strong. He contributed to the team, gets some points, but not that many. It's like 10.8, I think, right? So not much. And then in the 6th round, you got Elijah Mitchell. We all know Elijah Mitchell, if it wasn't for the injuries, may have been our starting running back for years. They may have never traded for Christian McCaffrey if Elijah Mitchell hadn't got hurt. He was that good. Now, his number's not that big, but he's got a solid number. It's better than Ambry Thomas. Not as good as, Colton McKivitz, right? It's kind of where he sits. Now, 2022, this is where things go downhill. According to the sort of the consensus, the 49ers started to fall off a cliff at this point as far as the draft grades. But what doesn't really get taken into consideration is what happens when you find a franchise quarterback in the 7th round. You can't call a draft with a franchise quarterback in the 7th round a bad draft. You got a quarterback who's gone to multiple Pro Bowls at this point and has been in the MVP conversation late in the season, who has put up top 10 numbers just about every year whenever he was healthy. That's the quarterback you got in the 7th round. That's a home run draft pick. That is the kind of pick that saves an entire draft. The same way that Kittle solved that first draft is like a 10 without Kittle. I guess it'd be like a 25. Okay. That second draft is like a 10 or a 15 without Fred Warner. This is the same thing, right? So in the 2022 draft, it's ugly. Drake Jackson, bust. Tyrion Davis-Price, bust. Danny Gray, bust. Spencer Burford. Now, you got some quality contribution out of Burford. You did. Might have cost us a Super Bowl. That sticks in everybody's craw. But, you drafted a 4th-round offensive lineman who gave you some quality starts. That's not a nothing. That's not a bust, right? Doesn't elevate your draft class much, but it doesn't take away from it either. Samuel Wolbach didn't work out. He actually turned out to play pretty well for the Colts. Nick Sakel, Trey Castro-Fields. There's one other player here that doesn't really get mentioned much. Obviously, Brock Purdy is the last draft in round 7, but Kalia Davis was drafted in this draft is also in the 6th round. Kalia Davis was our starting defensive tackle for most of the season last year. You drafted him in the 6th round 3 years ago. He's continued to develop. He's given us good snaps. He's given us quality starts. Now, is he a guy you're going to go sign a $20 million contract? No. Is he the kind of guy where you're always trying to upgrade? Of course. But he's just kind of your mid-level, average starting NFL defensive tackle. For the bottom 10 defensive lines in the NFL, he would start day 1. For the top 20 defensive lines, maybe in the middle there somewhere, he's fighting for a spot. He's just one of those guys. There's several teams in the NFL that would love to have Kalia Davis as a starting defensive tackle for their team. He was drafted in the 6th round. So this is not a nothing draft. Now, it's not a great draft. However, it gets a very high score. Why does it get a very high score? It gets an elite score. Why? Because Brock Purdy he's a perfect 60. Right? So for an individual player, you got multiple accolades, so you get a max score for contribution. You signed an AAV top 10% at your position. You signed a second contract with your team. I mean, he checks every single box of what you want from a draft pick. You want a guy who makes multiple Pro Bowls. You want a guy who signs a big deal contract because he's one of the best players in his position. You want a guy who signs a second contract. You want a guy who is a franchise cornerstone. Brock Purdy is all those things, and you got him with the last pick in the draft. That one pick alone makes this a top-tier draft because it doesn't happen often. You can compare it to the 1999 draft for the Patriots. Do you think anybody considers that draft a bust? Of course not. You got the best quarterback of all time in that draft. The rest of the draft doesn't matter. You reset your entire franchise with that draft class, even though none of them played except for Tom Brady. It doesn't matter. That draft class reset your franchise because of that one player. One player can have that much of an effect on a draft class. So in this particular draft class, you get a couple of players who contribute, and you get a franchise cornerstone with your franchise cornerback. That's a very good draft. That's a B+ draft, right? I think in this one, because Brock Purdy's number is so high, I think this is even in the 70s. Yeah, so it just hits that 70 threshold. So not quite that mid-70s to get to that elite draft class, but a very, very good draft. Very, very good draft. 2023. This is, again, another draft that is viewed as an atrocious draft. Jair Brown, Jake Moody, Cam Latu. This is not looking good. Robert Beal Jr., Darrell Luter Jr., D. Winters. There's a bright spot. Braden Willis, and several. I mean, probably the worst draft of the 49ers regime. It would have been the worst, even if Brock Purdy hadn't gotten. So the 2023 draft without, 2022 draft without Brock Purdy is the second worst draft in the Shanahan, John Lynch era. The worst draft is the 2023 draft. It literally has a score of 4.9. It's almost a negative score. And I didn't, when I was building this algorithm, I didn't even think that would be a possibility. I figured the low-level drafts would be like a 10 or a 12, something. I didn't think 4.9 was it's so bad. You got, in that entire draft, D. Winters. I guess Darrell Luter Jr. is still on the team. Braden Willis not on the team. Robert Beal Jr., I don't know if he's on the team or not, but he won't be much longer. Latu off the team. Jake Moody off the team. Jair Brown. He has contributed. He's done fairly well, but he hasn't done much. He's been kind of in and out of the lineup. Doesn't do much to save this one, and all the negatives really drag that score down. So at 4.9, worst draft so far. 2024. This is where – I'm sorry. I had to recalculate. I'm so sorry. I had to recalculate 2023 for because the AI that I used to pull all the data and stuff like that, it made a mess up, so I had to redo it. The actual total score is 13 for the 2023 draft. So without Brock Purdy, the 2022 draft actually would have been the worst draft in the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch-era. But they were saved by Brock Purdy. It actually turns into a decent draft, a good draft, really. And then 2023 now becomes the worst draft in the 49ers, in this era of the 49ers. Okay, so moving on. So 2024. This is a really good draft. I don't care what anybody says. Fight me. Fight me. You got a quality wide receiver. Now, had some struggles staying healthy. I understand. When he's been healthy, he's been one of those kind of borderline number. He's not even borderline. When he's been healthy, he's played as like a top wide receiver. He's played like a legit number one target in your passing offense. Now, when I say number one wide receiver, I'm not talking about that X receiver that people talk about. Oh, this is your true number one, all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about he is your primary option in the passing game. So when he was healthy, he was the primary option in the passing game, not George Kittle, not Christian McCaffrey, not Juwan Jennings. When Ricky Pearsall was healthy, he was the number one option in the offense. Go look at the targets. And when he got hurt, when he got healthy, watch the targets start to grow, watch his numbers grow, look at previous season. It's not that complicated. He's a perfect fit for Kyle Shanahan's system. He hasn't stayed healthy. So he doesn't get a very good score here. His score is 5.062. Why? Because he hasn't done much yet. He's been banged up. That's a quality draft pick. Now, I prefer is the 49ers plan had worked. The 49ers plan was to move back into the top of the second round and then potentially draft him there. I would have felt better about that. You get an extra draft pick. He's now a second round pick, not a first round pick. Everybody feels a lot better about that. Didn't work out that way. Quality pick at the end of the first round. Round 2, Renardo Green. He's your starting cornerback last year on a 12-win team. What are we talking about? He's your number 2 corner. It's a solid second-round pick. He has room to grow. The 49ers brought in a new defensive backs coach who actually elevates and develops defensive backs, has a long track record of doing so. Renardo Green might be the number 1 beneficiary of this. However, might turn out he's not good enough and the dude wants to get rid of him. They might trade him on draft day. I don't know. Nobody does. But as it stands right now, his contributions to the team thus far, 6.75. Not great, but not terrible. Every single player so far that the 49ers picked in this round has given significant contribution. They're all starters. First round pick, starting wide receiver. Second round pick, starting cornerback. Third round pick, starting right guard, who, when healthy, has been excellent. Fourth round pick, starting safety. 4 for 4 with your first 4 picks, you got starters. That is an excellent draft. Second, fourth round pick, Isaac Rendo, then Jacob Cowing. God, I hope that guy can stay healthy. He is so good. He is going to be so dynamic in this offense if he can just friggin' stay healthy. The amount of reports coming out of training camp last year about nobody can cover this guy. Nobody in the secondary. None can cover Jacob Cowing. And he can't run 2 days in a row without tearing a freaking leg muscle. It's infuriating. I like the Jacob Cowing pick, but he hasn't done anything yet. He gets like 3 points because he's done nothing, but basically late round pick and positional value give him a little bit of a boost that maybe he doesn't deserve, but it's the way the algorithm goes. So this particular draft, 34.9. Now, part of the fact that this is only a 34.9, right? So it's just shy of a 35-point draft. Why isn't it higher if I think it's such a good draft? Because these guys haven't played the end of their rookie years yet. If any of these guys sign another deal with the 49ers, if Ricky Pearsall signs an extension, if Dominic Pooney re-ups with the team, if Malik Mustafa re-ups with the team, that improves the value of this draft. So that's why it's only a 34 right now, because it's a to-be-determined draft. The current value on this is already at a 35. That's why I think it's such a good draft. It's already creeping into good draft territory, and we haven't even gotten to the end of any of these contracts. Okay, that was only 2. That was 2 drafts ago. Okay, those guys are only going into their 3rd season. Take that into consideration. It's already a 35. 2025 draft. These guys were rookies last year. You should not expect anything, because if you got multiple starts or awards out of a player that's a rookie, we'll get to this in a second. One of my biggest pet peeves. But if you got multiple awards, multiple starts out of a rookie, that is a home run draft pick, no matter where you pick them. If you draft a guy who is a Pro Bowl caliber player and starts multiple games for you, obviously he would have to start multiple games to be a Pro Bowl. If you draft a guy that makes a Pro Bowl in his rookie season, that's an excellent draft pick. Period. Talanoa Hufanga didn't work out. It was an excellent draft pick in the 5th round. It's that simple. If you disagree, put it in the comments, okay? Take a second right now. Help me out. Like, subscribe down in the comments, okay? If you disagree, if you agree with any of this, let me know. I'd love to hear you guys' feedback. I'm going to do like 3 or 4 versions of this algorithm. I'm going to keep building it, keep dissecting it, and trying to keep condensing it or building it out or whatever I have to do to make it as accurate as possible. I'm going to use this a lot moving forward. So any feedback that you guys have would be excellent. Thank you so much. Back to the show. So last year, Mykel Williams. I don't care what anybody says. The algorithm gives him a 6.5, which is kind of a decent little draft pick there. Okay. Not an excellent draft pick, not a year over year starter. But here's the thing. If Mykel Williams comes back next year and plays at a high level, even if he doesn't make a Pro Bowl, that number goes up. You'd have multiple working for you. Doesn't go up much. However, Alfred Collins, if he comes back strong this year, let's say he does what I think he's going to do and takes the next step and he's a Pro Bowl caliber defensive tackle, Alfred Collins' number goes from 7.5, where it's currently at, just above Mykel Williams. That number jumps up to 20, 25. That makes this draft pick instantly take a jump. Okay? That's why the numbers, if it's within 2 years of the current year, this algorithm starts to fall apart because there's no data to extrapolate from. There's nothing to impact the compounding nature of the way the algorithm is designed. So this last draft, where it currently stands now, okay? Again, let's go through this. Mykel Williams, starting edge. Alfred Collins, starting defensive tackle. Nick Martin, that looked promising. That has turned out to be a nothing burger so far. That's frustrating. Third round, Upton Stout, starter. Jordan Watkins. Let's see how that plays. He was a rookie last year. I hope the 49ers get Jordan Watkins and get Jacob Cowing on the field, and we can get some freaking speed on the field, stretch some teams, right? Please, 49ers, please. Jordan James. I think there's a real avenue for Jordan James to be the backup running back for the 49ers this year. Let's be honest. Any running back they draft is going to have a low score because they're not going to get any time, and they're certainly not going to start as long as Christian McCaffrey's on the team. So it is what it is. So if you draft a running back, you're already tanking your draft stock just a little bit no matter what. CJ West. High-end contributor, okay? Doesn't go on the starting fingers, but contributed in a big way, got better down the stretch, right? Hold your breath. Don't hold your breath. I'm sorry. Hold your breath. And CJ West, he's going to come around. I think he's going to come around. So 3 starters, a couple of quality contributors, excellent draft with the potential to be a home run draft. Both this year and last year. The 49ers are very quietly, because a lot of people aren't talking about it this way, but the 49ers are very quietly putting together a Super Bowl contender again. One more quality draft in this year's draft. If they come out of this draft class with a all-pro caliber player, don't care what position, and 2 quality starters out of this draft, they will have completed the building blocks for a Super Bowl contender. You've got defensive line youth. You've got young linebackers to pair with Fred Warner. You've got young secondary players. You've brought in a coach to get them to the next level. You've got everything you need now to put a Super Bowl contender together. You're one of those teams that's a piece or 2 away if you have a good draft this year. So will the 49ers have another 70-plus draft? Will they have a 75-plus draft? That's going to take a few years to find out, but I sure hope they do. Once again, if you like the content, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, help me out. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. And I'm going to keep doing this. So I've got a part 2 coming out for this in about a week. I'll be recording that a little bit later. And that will be taking the 49ers draft over the last 5 years, and we're going to compare it. How well have the Seahawks drafted? They just won a Super Bowl. How well have the Rams drafted? They won a Super Bowl and played in another. under McVay. We're going to look at all that. We're going to compare and contrast. And then we're going to look at some other teams around the league. We're going to look at the Chiefs. We're going to look at the Ravens. We're going to look at the Eagles. We're going to look at all these teams that are so highly touted as incredibly well-drafted teams that are winning Super Bowls, Chiefs, Eagles. And we're going to compare their draft to the 49ers draft and see just how far off the mark we are. I haven't done that compilation yet. I'm really excited to see what that pans out. Anyway, if you're getting some value out of this, if we are bringing context to the conversation for you, you know what to do. You guys have a good night. See you next time.